Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for some people to fill in and I'll get us started. So I think we are about filled in. So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Maria Pereira. I'm an attorney with the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project. Joining me today is Elizabeth Marx. She's the executive director of the Utility Law Project. We are here today to talk about some important LIHEAP updates, specifically about the supplemental program. We thought it would be helpful to get everyone together to answer any unanswered questions or any additional information that we can provide for you. We're also going to give you a quick update and overview of what the 2021 and 2022 LIHEAP full program year is going to look like. So to get us started, for those of you who don't know, once again, we are Pulp. We assist low-income families throughout Pennsylvania to connect to and afford utility services in their homes. We provide a number of services through Pulp, including group and individual representation, policy work, advocacy, as well as the training and outreach that we're here today performing. And I should say at the outset of this, we are going to be providing materials after the presentation. So for people who have signed up and are attending, look out for that as well. All right, to get us started, let's dive straight into the summer fall supplemental LIHEAP program. In order for a consumer, an applicant to be eligible, they must have received a LIHEAP grant in the last program year. And that's going to be November 1st, 2020 to April 30th, 2021. Now, the supplemental grant that we're talking about will not and does not affect eligibility for the full LIHEAP 2021-2022 program year. In addition, supplemental grants will be issued automatically and are expected to be released the first week of September. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more in a few slides what this automatic issuance is going to look like, but just be aware of how kind of it is issued. I think we could go to there. Thanks. So some additional kind of information and supplemental grant opportunities. There is deliverable fuels. This is called a summer fill. It's going to be in the amount of $200 for the supplemental grant. In addition, there is supplemental grants in the amount of $250 for vulnerable households. Now, when defining a vulnerable household, it does have a specific definition. That's going to be household members who are over 60 or under 5 or have a disability. The important caveat to this is even if there is more than one vulnerable household member, only one supplemental grant will be provided to each vulnerable household, regardless of how many of those vulnerable household members might be within the household.
And Ria, we had a question in the chat. I'm not sure it came through to all of us, but whether or not the supplemental grants being issued through LIHEAP are going to affect other benefits like medical assistance, SNAP, and SSI. And so just to get going on that question, no, this should not affect your other benefits or the consumer or client's other benefits. This is a supplemental grant program and shouldn't have any impact on income maintenance type programs. And I'll pass it back to you, Ria.
Thanks, Liz. And I think there's another question that came to everyone. Could you please say how they'll know how someone has a disability? Does this just mean SSI or SSD, or could it mean disability related to MA? Now, Liz might have a little bit more information with this, but I think generally there is a fairly broad definition about how to define a disability.
Yeah, and so these grants are going to issue to everybody, and we've gone through pretty quickly, but just going back to the prior slide, they're going to be issued to everybody who received a supplemental grant last year, or a LIHEAP grant during the last year's program, which ran from November 1st to April 30. If they were a person that is on record with DHS as having a documented disability, in that case, they will receive the supplemental grant. But it's not, something open to being able to prove that you have a disability by some other means. I hope that answers the question.
And I believe there's 2 more questions that came in, so I'm going to try to address that now just to make sure that we don't forget about them. So for deliverable fuels, Megan Williams asks, will vendors be directed to apply for the supplemental towards the fill instead of the past due bill?
And that's no, it will go on the account. And so if there is a past due bill, it'll help that household catch up on that bill so that they're eligible for a new delivery. And the good thing about this program is that it's getting money out to the households to be able to get them ready for winter. So it should help to pay down if they have a past due bill, or go towards another delivery. And it comes on the heels of the opening of the new LIHEAP season. And none of these grants are going to affect the ability for people to get a new grant. And we'll go over what the grant amounts will be. There's going to be a lot higher grant amounts in this new program year once that opens. This is just, think of it as the tail end of last year's LIHEAP season. There was some funding left over that is being spent in a number of ways. One is these supplemental grants. The other Rhea will cover in a moment with the utility file transfer.
Right. And I think Laura Handel asked a follow-up question, Liz, to make sure that if households who received a LIHEAP 2020, 2021 received a supplemental grant, but instead of households just within those vulnerable kind of class of categories. And I think you did answer that.
Yeah, there's only 2 forms of supplemental grants this year. It's going to be, if you have deliverable fuels, you'll get a $200 supplemental grant. And I'll add, we just got some dates after we had put together this presentation. So the supplemental grants to vulnerable households will be issued August 27th and paid by the Treasury September 8th. Supplemental grants to deliverable fuel customers are a little bit further behind. They will be issued September 30th and paid by the Treasury October 13th. So all of that will happen right before the new program opens, in which case people will be able to get their regular LIHEAP season grant. But there is no, and Rhea will cover in a moment, the utility file transfer program, which is the other way for people who received LIHEAP in 2020, 2021 program year to receive a supplemental grant if they're not considered one of the vulnerable households and they aren't deliverable fuel customers.
And Deborah, to your question, it's not just the emergency LIHEAP grant, it's the LIHEAP grant within that period of time that I believe was on Liz's last slide that she just had.
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding the question, this is not like last year's program where there was some grants issued to people who received a crisis grant last year. These supplemental grants are open to everybody. They will issue to anybody who received LIHEAP last year, regardless of whether it was a cash or a crisis grant.
And I think that takes care of the questions, at least for now. So let's talk now about the utility file transfer, the UFT program. Now we're going to describe this a little more on the next slide, but this is going to be grants that are specifically applied for on behalf of consumers from the utilities. So the utilities are actually the ones that are applying for these UFT grants. So let's go through some of the eligibility criteria and terms. First, the consumer must be at risk of termination or already off. The grants are going to be in the amount of up to $1,200, and this is going to be in addition to the amount issued during the program year. Next, the grant must be adequate to stop termination. We often say with LIHEAP in general, this can be by itself, standing alone, I should say, or it can be if in combination if the consumer does have some additional funds available through a different source or from themselves. So the UFT will be open for 5 weeks. It's not a very long period, and we're going to go over what that looks like in practicality on the next slide. But the big caveat again is that participation in the UFT does not impact eligibility for the regular 2021 and 2022 line.
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to ask you this. How do we uh, look at the vulnerable clients that we're serving? How have we chosen those individuals?
Those are individuals who either have a household member who is over 60, under 5, or has a disability that's documented with DHS. So they receive, disability payments or otherwise are known to DHS to have a documented disability. Those are the groups that, they've already been identified because they applied last year and that information is on file with DHS. There is going back to the supplemental grants, there is nothing anybody has to do to get the supplemental grant. They will issue automatically if you received a LIHEAP grant last year during the program year from November 1 to April 30, and you are in one of those groups. You either received a deliverable fuel, you'll get the deliverable fuel supplement, or if you received or if you're a vulnerable household and you fit one of those categories on record with DHS, you will get the supplemental, the $250 supplemental grant. Just to reiterate, I think Rhea said this earlier, but the supplemental grant to vulnerable households, if somebody has both a household member over 60 and under 5, for instance, they will still get one grant. Multiple grants will not issue if you have multiple vulnerabilities within your household.
Okay, thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Liz. And I think there's one more question that actually just came through. Can customers with high balances qualify for the UFT if the utility is not currently terminating those customers? So to start us off, and Liz might be able to give more information on this, but the first point is that the consumer must either be already in the off status or at risk of termination. That's a lot of times shown through a termination notice that might be on the table. So they are looking for that risk of termination qualification, but Liz might be able to add to that.
There's some discussion, and thanks for the question, Joe, and I may need to follow up with everyone on this. I believe we got clarification that because the policy was in place during the last program year to accept a past due balance that would otherwise form the basis of termination, that they could be included in the utilities file transfer. That is, I need to get a little more clarification just to verify that, but it's my understanding that they would. So don't take me at 100% because I do like to verify things when I'm not sure. So let's follow up with you all on that one.
I think if there's no other questions, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so referencing back to what I said before, to participate, an eligible household must provide consent to the utility to apply for the grant on their behalf. And this communication could come in a number of ways. So it could come over text, email, phone, snail mail, for the utility actually reaching out, which means that if a customer does get a call from a utility, that it's important that they take the communication call to see if the UFT is on the table. So for those consumers who do not receive affirmative communication from their utility, they do have the ability to potentially request that the utility add them to the UFT list. The utility participation in the UFT may vary, so we are encouraging customers to figure out what the specific rules and what's going on with their individual utilities are. And I think if there's no questions, I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
Right. Well, I'm going to go through a couple of frequently asked questions. So you guys have great questions that we didn't think were frequently asked. And so, if keep the questions coming in. The first is, what happens if a LIHEAP recipient moves? Since they received the LIHEAP grant, if they move, will they receive that supplemental grant? And unfortunately, the answer to that question is no. They will not receive the LIHEAP supplemental supplemental grant because the DHS can't verify whether or not they still have a heating responsibility. I will note, this is not a perfect program. It is a very good program to get as much money out to those in need as quickly as possible. So the supplemental grants are not available to people with changed circumstances like a move. Another question that we've been getting a few times: if a LIHEAP recipient received a cash grant to one vendor and a crisis grant to a different vendor, where's that supplemental grant gonna go? And the answer is that it'll go to whoever they received their last LIHEAP benefit for. So if they applied early on in the season, for instance, for a for a cash grant to go to their natural gas provider, and later in the season they were facing termination or had were far enough behind on their bill that they were at risk of termination and for their electric service, and they sent their crisis grant to electric. The last grant they received would have been for electricity, so the supplemental grant will go to their electric provider. Couple of other questions. When does utility file transfer begin and when will it close? And the answer is that it's already begun. And so the utilities are reaching out. They are trying to get consent from customers who are at risk of termination. There is some particular challenges with the UFT because that utility needs to get consent from the consumer to put them on that list and get them up to $1,200. But at a time when you're facing termination, it is hard to get somebody to answer the phone from the utility. So if you're working with consumers, message would be talk to the utility, right? Because they may be able to get them on this utility file transfer if they received the LIHEAP grant last year. So we have to overcome some of those hurdles, and certainly any service providers out in the field working with consumers, we should get them in touch with their utility if they're at risk of termination to see if they're eligible to get on the utility file transfer list. Another commonly asked question: can LIHEAP recipients who received a grant last year for one vendor get on the utility file transfer list for another vendor? And the answer to that question is no. They can't switch the vendors right now for the utility file transfer. However, if they received a cash grant last year to one utility and a crisis grant to another, they are able, if they're at risk of termination for both, they can get on both vendors' utility file transfer list and get a grant up to $1,200 to stop termination of both services. So for instance, in the Philadelphia area, if somebody received a cash grant for PICO and a crisis grant for PGW, and now they're behind again and at risk of termination in both utilities, they are eligible to get a utility file transfer grant through both. All right. Well, before I go into some preview of what's coming, because it's coming quickly, and we wanted to give you both the update on what's going out and when for supplemental grants, as well as give you a little preview of what's coming with LIHEAP. But if there are questions, please type them into the chat on how the supplemental grants are going to work. And if not, I'll move into some overview of next year's program. All right. Well, the preview, and this is a preview, and I have to give a big asterisk that the final LIHEAP state plan is still under review by the federal government. So I'm getting ahead of DHS a little bit. Hope they're not mad at me, but we do have some publicly available information about what the program is going to look like, and I wanted to make sure you all know what's coming, right? Because that's important to be able to know how to get clients to keep them connected for the next couple of weeks until we get to LIHEAP season. So the first wonderful news is DHS has decided to open the program early this year. This is the first time since I've started in this work that the program has opened before November 1st, except for the pre-application. And I'll say the pre-application periods will still be as normal. That will open in October, and people who received LIHEAP in the past will get a pre-application card and may be able to apply early for a cash grant. The program will open though to new applicants on October 18th. So it's going to open a full 2 weeks early, and it is slated to be open until May 6th. So DHS has not only said they would open the program 2 weeks early, they are going to keep that program weeks after they would normally close it, and that allows a lot more overlap to address high arrears at the end of the winter moratorium, which every year ends April 1st or March 31st. So a little preview on what the cash and crisis grants are going to look like. There is a big increase in the minimum grant for cash grants this year, minimum $500 cash grant. That means anybody who's income eligible for LIHEAP will receive a minimum $500 cash grant. The maximum is going to be $1,500 this year, which is a lot higher than in normal years. Crisis grant is also going to be a lot higher. The maximum is going to be $1,200. Last year, that maximum was increased to $800, and the year before, and just about every year before that, it's somewhere around $600. So we're looking at almost twice what the normal crisis grant would be. So we are hopeful that will help to address the utility debt crisis that has grown through the pandemic. Of course, want to remind everyone the emergency furnace component of LIHEAP that people often forget about. But if somebody is without a working or a heating system, or their heating system is in need of repair, they may be eligible for the emergency furnace and service line repair program that can come out and fix that system and make sure it's operable. That should also open October 18th. So it will too be open a little bit earlier than normal. So as people start to turn on their heating systems in October, they hopefully, if there's a problem, can get help right away. Eligibility has not changed, and so it's still going to be 150% of the federal poverty level or below, a home heating responsibility, and a Pennsylvania resident. And then for the crisis grant, there's some additional eligibility. It'll require an actual or imminent home heating emergency, meaning somebody is at risk of termination, either has a termination notice. We haven't, to Joe's earlier question about whether or not high balances where you would otherwise be eligible for termination but don't have a termination notice. I don't believe we've received final word from DHS on whether they're going to extend that additional policy through next year, but I will follow up with you all when I get an answer to that question. So that's the preview. And then what I'll say is, this was a quick webinar. We wanted to not bog down your day, but give you some verbal updates on what's happening in LIHEAP. We do plan to give our annual LIHEAP webinar on October 15th. For those of you in the Pennsylvania Legal Aid Network, that does overlap some with the planned conference, but our LIHEAP webinar is open to much broader audience, service providers, utilities, regulators, just about everybody working in the space. So we will be sending out some registration information soon on that. Just wanted to make sure you've saved the date. We also will have some webinars coming up for service providers on the low-income home water assistance program, which is brand new through the American Rescue Plan. There's some significant funding. That program is slated to open January 1. As far as we know. Yes, I see Marcia's face with that one, and we agree it is, coming late, but we are happy that it is coming, and we will send out to everybody information about that webinar as well. So with that, we are almost at 2:30. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to answer we promised we'd be available for any utility questions. So LIHEAP or not, if you have questions, you're running into issues, we have a couple minutes left to be able to answer. And I'll give it a minute if people have questions to type in the chat, or, feel free to unmute yourself with a question. While we're waiting, I do want to remind folks that one of the major protections that was put in place following the expiration of the winter moratorium was that the Public Utility Commission required there to be additional payment arrangements available to consumers up to 5 years. And so those are still available for now, but after September 30, they will no longer be available. So if you're working with clients that are over income for some of these programs, they need to contact their utility and work out a payment arrangement now, right? Waiting till September 30, they may not be eligible for as long of a payment arrangement as they are right now, or as lenient, right? Because one of the things that the commission said was, if you have broken a prior payment arrangement, you can get a new one. And so that those flexible rules with payment arrangements will no longer be the case after September 30. So we are encouraging anybody who's behind to, if they apply for the available assistance programs first, and the emergency rental and utility assistance can wipe clean debt going back to March 2020. So it's important to get those applications in. But if you're not eligible for other programs, for the customer assistance programs, for the hardship fund grants, certainly getting in a payment arrangement is the best way to avoid termination right now. So lots of help available out there, and we're just trying to connect those dots. I do see a couple questions about whether the PowerPoint is going to be available, and absolutely, they are available. We will send those out after the presentation. And there's another question in here about the utility file transfer and which utilities are eligible. That would be any of the regulated natural gas and electric companies. And anybody who is with one of the electric cooperatives. Doesn't include the water because you have to have received the LIHEAP grant, and this is for home energy. So that includes, where you are, Laura, in the south east part of the state, it would be PECO, PGW, but also across the state, PPL, UGI, and NFG, Duquesne Light, Columbia Gas, Peoples Gas, probably for the four first energy companies, MedEd, for Penelec, Penn Power, and West Penn Power. And I'm probably forgetting at least one. There's also about 12 unregulated electric cooperatives that would be eligible for the file transfer, of course, again, if they received LIHEAP last year. And Maddie put up in the chat a link to other utility resources that we have on our webpage. I encourage you all to take a look at what's up there. We've put up some really great resources that the Pulp team has been working on, Maddie in particular, on getting some regionally specific resource sheets up there. So if there's something you're looking for and it's not there, do reach out. And this is, a reminder that we do operate a small emergency utility hotline if somebody is facing termination. And then for all of you, the service providers, legal services, social services, utilities, whoever it is, if you have questions or need technical assistance, you can always email us at pulp@pautilitylawproject.org. That goes to the whole team, and whoever is available should be able to answer that question. I also encourage you to follow us on Facebook. We put a lot of resources up there and some interesting articles and things that are happening. So do follow us for up to the minute information when we can get that out. And we are at 2:30, and I promised a brief webinar. So I hope this has been helpful and a quick interruption in your day to be able to get some useful tips and information. So with that, unless there are other questions, I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll be sending out some other stuff soon. So thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.